Hello guys, today we are going to discuss Montesquieu's theory of separations of powers which we can find in his book The Spirit of Laws. Before we start, it is worth mentioning a well-known quote of Montesquieu that there would be an end of everything, life and liberty, if the same man or the same body, whether of nobles or of peoples, were to exercise these three powers, that of enacting laws, that of enforcing them, and of trying the cases of the individuals. These are the three powers, namely legislation, executive, and the judiciary. And it simply means that if all the three powers of the statecrafts concentrated in one hand or a few peoples, then there would be an end of everything. Origin of this revolutionary theory of Montesquieu lies since the ancient days of Aristotle. Political thinkers have recognized threefold functions of the government, for example, legislature, executive, and judiciary. But the Montesquieu, the celebrated French thinker of 18th century, go one step further and tried to build walls around these three powerhouses of the government in order to separate them and to avoid interference between them. Here arise two questions: why he was done this and what he wants to achieve from this. The answer of the first question is that in his time France is ruled by tyrannical kings and the people don't have liberty. He visited England in 1748 where he saw people enjoy liberty without a tyrannical government. He thought that the English people enjoyed individual liberty because here the organs of the state don't interfere each other's domain by choice, not by compulsions. And he also wants the same for the people of France, which is the answer of the second question. So his theory of separation of power in a nutshell is the liberty of individual required that neither all these three powers which is mentioned earlier, nor any two of them should be placed in the hands of one man or a body of men. To understand this, if legislative power and the executive power combine in one hand and that person behave like a tyrannical manners, same in this way, if the judicial power and the legislative power belongs to one person, then the life of and the liberty of the individuals would be exposed to arbitrary control. And if judicial power and executive power is concentrated in one hand, then the judges might behave with violence. If all the three powers concentrated in one hands, then there is nothing left and it is end of everything. This powerful thought of Montesquieu also influenced other political thinkers such as Hamilton, as he also say accumulations of all powers, for example legislature, executive and judiciary in the same hands may justly be pronounced the very definitions of tyranny. To explain the Montesquieu theory, we must first note that he was primarily concerned to preserve the liberty of individuals. He was of the view that whoever possessed the powers would abuse it. In order to prevent this condition, he suggested the solutions that the power of the government should be so divided or so separated that one power should be a check upon to other powers, and thus the balance we can achieve in this phenomena. And in this way, tyranny would be avoided and liberty safeguarded. Here arise another questions that what sort of separation Montesquieu wants, complete or a partial one. The theory is true only in part and under certain limitations. Partial separation and the checks improved functional specialization which leads to the administrative efficiency and good governance. And the complete separation of power give rise to certain problems which we discussed next. Next point is separation of power and individual liberty. Is the separation of power necessary to secure the liberty of individual? As I mentioned earlier, this theory proposed by Montesquieu of individual liberty alone, but individual liberty can only ensure through separation of power is not true. For example, separation of power in operation in United States of America and not in UK, or at least to the extent it applicable in USA. Yet individual liberty is as secure there as in USA, because primarily it depends upon the spirit of people and their laws and the behavior of their institutions. As I mentioned earlier, that they follow or the separation of power by choice, not by the compulsions or by any law. Next point is application of separation of power in the modern constitution. Montesquieu's theory had great influence in America, where it becomes a political dogma of the people in revolt against the Great Britain. They desired liberty in the sense same as that Montesquieu understood it. They desired to put limits of despotism which Britishers had imposed on them. As Dr. H. Finner rightly remarks, that the American constitutions consciously and elaborately made an essay in the separations of power, and is today the most important polity in the world operate upon that principle. How this doctrine applicable in USA? Executive is not part of legislature. The president elected for 4 years can't legislate. His ministers or advisors not part of the legislature. Judges are independent, but legislature is nothing to do with the administrations of the state. This is the stated procedure in United States of America, but in actual practice, it is observed only in a partial form. There is no absolute separations of power. President influence legislation by sending messages or his veto power. President appoint judges and grant pardon. And on the other hand, the Senate, which is part of the legislature, is control all the important appointments in the United States, as all the important appointments are ratified by the Senate, because president cannot appoint a key individual without the ratifications of the Senate. It is interesting that the Montesquieu formulated his theory of separation of power on basis of his observations of the English constitutions, but in actual practice there is no separation of power in law. In practice, the parliament has only power of legislation. The crown has executive power. Executive and legislature are closely related and independent, and the link is cabinet. Cabinet and the head of the cabinet, which is obviously the Prime Minister of Great Britain, are part of executive, and also they part and attend sessions of British legislature, House of Commons. In France, before 1958, separation of power exists in France, but now French president elections and the cabinet systems and the pardons or suspensive veto of French president is not according to the doctrine of separations of power. Now we discuss the criticisms of separations of power. The theory of separation of power, if applied in a partial manner, then it promotes efficiency, protects the independence of judiciary, safeguard liberty. But if this theory applied in a strict manner, it will produce several defects. Just like Professor Garner said, that the strict separation of power is not only impractical as a working principle of the government, but it is not to be desired in practice. In short, in his word, it is neither possible nor desirable. Not possible in the sense that statecraft is just like human body, that all the organs of human body must work in coherence or in corporations with each other, just like the statecraft, all the three organs cooperate and interdependent and work with cooperation. Number 2 is it leads to the constitutional deadlocks and administrative inefficiency. Also, it promotes departmentalism and paralysis of government machinery. Number 3 is all departments are not coordinate or equal. For example, legislature is superior because it represents people or a will of the state. It controls or regulates the finances of the nation. Executive and judiciary ultimately usually responsible to the legislature. Fourth drawback of this is it destroys responsibility. For example, legislature is responsible to the people, and people elected their representative in the legislatures, but judiciary and the executive usually are not directly elected by the people. Legislature is bound to go to the people for their re-election, and the people decide their fate according to their performance. In this way, a major portion of responsibility lie on the shoulder of legislature. On the other hand, the judiciary or the judicial function is a specialized task. It needs not to elected directly by the people of the state, and this way the judges and the judiciary is not so responsible to the people as responsible as compared to responsibility of the legislature. And to conclude, we can say that the separations of power cannot be 100% or are fully enforced because it has never been anything more than a theory and an idea. So it must be applicable with certain checks and balances. Whenever a constitution is framed on a strict and extreme separation of power, it fails to work at all, as did the French constitution of 1791, which had to be scrapped within 2 years. Because statecraft is a collective effort, and no organ of the state can be best performed in isolation.